Welcome to another episode of the Lifeguard Project podcast. Today we are joined by Debbie Friedman, who I had the privilege of sitting down with in her home in Santa Cruz, California. Debbie was one of the first women to step into a lifeguard tower along the Camp Pendleton coast in 1978 and became the first woman permanent lifeguard peace officer with California State Parks. Debbie has served as a leader, a mentor, an international lifeguard, and a training instructor. But lifeguarding wasn't just a job for her. Debbie's husband and 2 kids also followed in her footsteps, guarding the beaches along a lot of spots in the California coastline. Now, Debbie is writing a book to shine a light on the often overlooked stories of the early women lifeguards, or as we learn in this episode, lifeguards. Debbie and I discuss a wide variety of concepts regarding early lessons learned, stereotypes, and how it all ties back to the common experience amongst lifeguards in general, regardless of gender. Although we can't share about the book she's writing yet, I can say that I did get to listen to Debbie read the first chapter, which really set the stage for an exciting journey when we do get to reveal it sometime in the future. So stay tuned and enjoy the conversation. And thanks as always for supporting the Lifeguard Project. Cool, Deb. Well, thanks for letting me into your home, letting me take up your Sunday morning. And I'm super excited to have this conversation, even just now for people that are listening, don't know that I got a chance to listen to one of the first chapters of the book, and we'll get into all that. But just to kind of set the stage, obviously you are writing a book about what?
Early women lifeguards. I was an early woman, I call it, in the late 1970s. And first of all, I'd like to thank you for letting me do this. I'm a huge fan of the Lifeguard Project and the work you're doing. So here I am, sitting down, and I'm grateful. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. So just introduce yourself a little bit. Where were you born? Where did you start up your life, and how did you get into
lifeguarding?
The lifeguard world? Yeah.
Yeah. I started out as a kid in LA, and we moved to Orange County when I was just starting high school, and I joined the Mission Viejo Nadadores. I was a little late to competitive swimming. It took over my life. I became a very strong swimmer and ended up having things come to me because of swimming very quickly. I did not understand the fight that Title IX was providing me for equal access to swimming pools. I did not know that women were not lifeguards at the time. I had scholarship offers to go to college and swim, and I didn't know that those were fairly new. I was very young when I started college at 17, and I chose to stay behind and go to Saddleback College. It was a wonderful experience. I met lifeguards for the first time. I started having fun with swimming, and one of those lifeguards was Scott Stewart. He, just as a lark, just said, "Why don't you come to tryouts the next day?" Mm-hmm. And before I knew it, it's a great summer job. And here I am on the starting line to become a lifeguard.
Yeah.
And
so let me just slow you down for 1 second. The Nadadores was just a club swim team?
It was a club swim team. And at that time, and it remains one of the top swim programs.
Where did you first learn to swim? I was asking that question.
I learned to swim in Victoria Park in Gardena, California. And I was a kid,
Who taught you?
Pardon me?
Who taught you?
My mom taught me. She was from Ireland. And that's a great question, because what I thought was swimming was going back with the side stroke and the Australian crawl and playing underwater. It wasn't until I showed up on the deck of the Nadadores that I was sent to the little kid pool to learn how to do freestyle backstroke, flip turns, So I was late. I was late to swimming, but once you buy into that program, it takes over. It's your life.
And before you mentioned Scott Stewart, and let me back you up just a little. What was your first memory of, beach lifeguarding is a thing? Do you remember if there was there?
I totally do. And great question. I write about it, is that we were given part of August off every year. And we would jump on the bus from Marguerite Parkway that would drop us off at T Street, San Clemente. And it was amazing. We still stunk like chlorine, and we were still wearing the most bizarre combinations of bikini tops and putting our Speedos on over them. And, we were obviously non-ocean people. And there was and still remains a lifeguard tower right there at T Street. And it was a vague memory. We really pretty much ignored the lifeguards, probably were making trouble for the lifeguard. We didn't know what a black ball flag was or a rip current. But there was this lifeguard. We'd put our towels down underneath the tower. And it was always a man. And we were not, I'll speak for myself, I wasn't at all dreaming about that job. I was pretty oblivious to it. But within a few years, I'd be working, down coast, San Clemente State Beach. So.
And did you see a rescue or something? Or was there any moments where you actually saw what the lifeguards were doing? Or was it just okay, we would show up, we'd put our stuff by the tower and we knew of the concept?
There was no consciousness of lifeguarding in my mind, that I was one of this generation of people that were coming into lifeguarding through pools. And when I went to Tryout, I did not have ocean experience. I loved the ocean. I loved swimming in that warm, salty water compared to a pool. But it was not something I was planning on. I was a pool swimmer.
And it's the more and more I think about it too, because for me it was. I think we spoke about someone, saying it in passing at a party, and then you try out the next day. Is the same way I got in, where it's just oh, you should try out. I knew of the concept, but it never was this driven actually thing I was going for until you go into that profession, and then it captivates.
And then it captivates you. It takes over.
So I think that's so interesting that even us as lifeguards are guilty of that in the early. And that's why I always like to ask how did that first even blip on the radar of being an option for people?
Yeah.
I always like asking that question. And so you did the Natadors, you came into it with a lot of pool experience and swimming experience. But you were going to the beach, it sounds like, on your time off, correct?
Not very much, though.
Okay.
So, between school, swimming, being raised as a kid, away from the beach, we might go twice a summer when I was little. I was not raised with the ocean. And even lifeguarding was evolving back then from the surfers that were the mainstay of lifeguarding. We were becoming so strong in the water that I'm sad to say I didn't bring a lot of ocean experience, but I brought a great deal of strength. And when somehow myself or other people get on that starting line and you compete and you show promise and you show an ability to learn, you can learn the skills to be a lifeguard. If you stay open to it, if you keep that attitude. And for me, that spark probably came after I was a lifeguard.
Yeah.
That I went through training. It was starting to become once you get past the fear, it's becoming pretty exciting. And then it's like the deep dive into this life that I call it, I fell in love. That first summer, it's like, where's this been my whole life? And the deep dive into this world.
Well, and it's interesting because I think people have a misconception of some of the best lifeguards that have come through training and stuff are people that come to it not from an ocean. Because a lot of kids come in that are around the ocean that are surfers, and they assume they're going to be good because they surf or know the ocean. But there's a different side of it where it is a different skill set in lifeguarding, that you need to know other aspects of not just ocean knowledge, but as an employee, as your awareness, as your integrity to show up and watch the water, which become more valuable that some people don't maybe tune into initially. And so a lot of times if you don't have that ocean experience, and as a pool swimmer, let's call it, people tend to apply a different stereotype to that, which I think is false. And I think a lot of people who are also coming from inland or places where there is just a pool and they don't have access to the ocean, sometimes become some of the best ocean lifeguards because they show up willing to learn and to learn those skills and approach it in that exact openness that you're portraying, in that willingness to learn and that teachability. And so that's like even a stereotype in and of itself, especially with people that have less access to learn how to swim, be on a club swim team and all that stuff. Do they possess the potential to be a good lifeguard? Absolutely. And I think that's a big concept. I mean, that's almost a separate podcast just to talk about that. But I like that with what we're going to get into, that your approach was that, because I think that's going to play into some level of dynamics there that you experienced, and hopefully.
You're touching on so many pieces of both a woman's experience and lifeguarding. And I think the main takeaway might be that we all bring different skills. And lifeguarding was shifting anyway, that for men and women were coming more and more from swim programs. But looking back, trying to focus on my experience as a woman, there were and continue to be different paths people are taking to lifeguarding, and make that into the bigger issue of, if you can accept a pool swimmer, you can accept women or different people that are bringing different skills. How do we work together? How do we train
Absolutely.
to maximize our strengths?
Absolutely.
And at first I was a little embarrassed. I'm bringing pool skills, and you're having to teach me what a rip current is. Not really graduating training and not really still getting it. And if you keep open, work hard at what you're being taught, you do have the tools to succeed.
Yeah. So let's set the tone first. And we talked about this a little bit before we started recording. In your experience and your perspective, we're going to start talking about the subjects of gender as it applies to lifeguarding. And that can be, a lot of people just, when they get into that topic, get fired up and get angry and whatever. We're not here to do that, but do set the tone for me and maybe for other people who are listening. And we talked about the vocabulary and how you can refer to certain people in different ways, male and female. We talked about the informal way or the formal way, a sexualized, non-sexualized way, like you said, militaristic. Give me that once over before we start so we can make sure we're setting the tone for the rest of the podcast.
You bet. The language we use is so interesting. You started off probably by asking, what does someone want to be called? And that's such an easy way to handle it. I prefer woman, and there's no right or wrong answer to this. And that means that you can be called a female, you could be called a male, you can be called whatever we are on this spectrum. But giving people labels sometimes can shut them down. The female, I'm going personal again, female makes me feel it works great for lifeguarding. It's kind of an asexual, sterile word. The words that we often get labeled with are so huge, from chick to gal to girl. And they're used to kind of put us all in one group, which is wrong. We're all so different. When we spoke, I loved one of the things that we kind of agreed on was, if you're wondering what should someone be called, not a whole group of people, but we used the example of what you might see in words about lifeguards and female lifeguards. That's something I've seen. And if you flip that to lifeguards and male lifeguards, you might get a sense of that it's getting silly. So where are we going to go with the terminology behind it? The vast majority of women I spoke with over the years and during this book writing just want to be called lifeguards. So if you're short on what's the answer, use the word lifeguards. I thought of something recently that there was one of my lifeguard trainers and friends called Carl Drake, and we worked together at San Clemente, and he was writing a lifeguard manual one winter, when lifeguards are doing the quieter duties. And he said, I want you to look at this draft. And I read it, and it was excellent and had all the important points. And I said, when I gave it back, though, I said, everything in it refers to he. And he said, I had no idea that, I'm a fellow permanent, I'm a friend. And he just went, it was an incredible moment of who I wasn't thinking about it. So that stayed with me. And I have the responsibility now to say, if I'm writing it, who am I leaving out too? And it was good to not even say he, she, it's the lifeguard. It was an easy way to resolve that particular story.
Absolutely. And I like what we discussed before, and you brought up a concept that we are going to discuss men and women in lifeguarding. However, the bigger view of this is we're discussing lifeguarding.
Yeah.
Right. And that's kind of what you're alluding to there. And you mentioned when we spoke before, those basic human things about all of us within the context of that job being misunderstood and unique. That's a lot of the condition that you speak about as well, right? It comes down to the basics of what lifeguarding as a profession does for us. However, in the early times, and we'll go into the first women or early women, right? There were different, unique, basic human aspects that were new, that weren't addressed before, that was new for everyone. And so it brought up certain things that had to be.
Oh, yeah. I'm writing about that time when everything was black, white, male, female. And I'm writing very specifically about men and women and what was different, what we had to sort out.
Yeah.
And those who we were gender-wise were issues and continue to be issues. We're still looking for those labels.
Yeah.
And if we
of course.
Yeah, and if we get rid of those, we're going to include a lot more people. But those are the lessons learned. I like to think of those.
Absolutely.
And
still learning.
Yeah, and Maya Angelou, writes, "When we know better, do better." And I think that's part of our evolution forward.
I love it. And hopefully once we're finished with this conversation, people can take whatever piece of that away for themselves. Because I know every time I talk to you about it, I learn something new. So let's go to your experience when you first tried out for state lifeguarding. What year was that again when you tried out to be a lifeguard initially?
So it was 1978, and I had a semester of community college under my belt. And I mentioned that one of my fellow swimmers, and he was a lifeguard, told me Scott Stewart said, "Come on, there's a swim tomorrow." It was that simple. And then another one of my good friends that I'd swam with had gone to San Diego State, and we were talking about it. She was going to do another tryout round that was coming up. So, I did not know that women were not guarding. And I showed up as the only woman at Huntington State Beach for that particular swim, and it was either February or March of 1978. And I wasn't like hyper aware of that. I was aware. The fear of Scott hadn't showed up. He told me he's going to be there. You don't really know where to go. You're just following all these guys to a starting line, and somebody's yelling they're going to fire a gun. It's all like, oh my gosh, what do I do? You follow, and then you get your competitive instinct kicks in, and you're grabbing the person in front of you to beat them. And so it was, you're this mix of both, of fear and then just wanting to win. It was the core of who you were at the time. So again, 1978, we were made well aware that we were going to be the first women at San Clemente in San Onofre, Doheny. But by then, there had probably been about a dozen women working up and down the coast. But when you were the first for an agency, you were still the first.
And let's talk, is this a good time to go into that concept of who was the first, or the first we've kind of touched on before?
Yeah, when I started this project, I really believed I was going to make the big list. I started an Excel sheet, and I was using the websites to tell me every agency along the coast of California, and I was dating them and identifying each person. I thought that was my project, and that was just crazy. There were so many announcements of who was the first at what beach, and it really didn't matter. Joyce Hoffman is kind of who we define as the first modern woman guard, who started at Del Mar in 1971. But by 1973, Kiani Noel was hired at Los Angeles City, and she was put on the Parade cover magazine and the Today Show, and she was literally that first. Every time someone showed where kind of no man had gone before, that idea of exploration, everybody that was showing up for the first time was becoming a first, and they also had to go through the fears of the men they were working with that hadn't worked with a woman yet. So that first was on that side too. And there were questions from their uniform, locker rooms, bathrooms. And then the big question was, were they strong enough to back me up to make the rescue? So those questions were recycled over and over and over again for that first generation of women.
Yeah, and I thought that was really interesting because the idea of who is the first, and you used in one of the excerpts in the book, which I just got a chance to listen to, which was really exciting. I like the example you used of NASA and the first woman in the U.S. versus the first woman
20 years before.
20 years before, the first woman that went to space, but was with the Russians, right? The Soviet Union.
Yeah.
And so that actually kind of hit a light bulb in my head with the describing, like you said, well, is it an Excel spreadsheet and who was the first? Or was there technically many firsts for this along the whole coast because each experience was the first experience there?
Yeah, and think about Newport. If you were hired as the first woman at Newport, but you weren't allowed to work the wedge, the limitations within each area.
They were all novel in their own way.
How first were you, and what freedom did you have to do your job? And those stories haven't been told, or we don't know the subtleties of what they meant. And I'm only going to tell a few.
Yeah.
We have better questions to ask now, maybe.
Absolutely. And so I think that's great, is just seeing that every single experience adds to the whole of that time period.
Yeah.
Right. So walk me through then in your early experience, once you're hired on and stuff, what kind of things did you start noticing? Or you mentioned, locker rooms or working at certain parts of the beach or certain things like the manuals are saying it didn't include uniforms for women, et cetera. So give me a once over for people listening on what was that time in the 70s, whether stories and people you've interviewed for the book or your own experience. What do you think are some things that are valuable to share in that early time?
The answer, at my age, looking back, is we all need support as rookies. It's complicated. It's scary. We came in with the same fears. The woman issue was kind of secondary for a lot of us, but for the people looking at us, our new bosses who were all men, they were sometimes looking at the woman issue first, and somewhere in between there would be finally a sweet spot where we could be recognized as young new guards and supported for the things we needed to learn. The issues for me, first of all, I didn't know that there were no other women. You didn't understand how you were being looked at, how you were being judged at first. And the ideas of continued to speak, probably the vast majority of things that were told to me first from other women were the locker room issue and where we would go to the bathroom. It seemed so funny to me until I heard it over and over and over again. And I had to think about why is that so important? San Clemente, there were no locker rooms. We shared a bathroom with maintenance that, was maybe cleaned once a week. It was universal to our experience that we did not have facilities. In LA County, that tended to have better facilities, that the idea that they had to share space or the secret things that went on in locker rooms were a little bit of an obstacle, and I don't think people were always conscious of why. There was an older LA County guy that told me he saw it as that if men had a locker room, there just should be an equal facility out of respect. And I like that. I didn't always understand it still. It hadn't been my experience. It was a lot of unknowns about how do we deal with these different creatures, literally. What are they going to... Even today you hear about, the separation of men and women in bathrooms. So it was held up maybe as an easy example to show that we're different. I still don't fully understand it. And the whole bathroom thing, women handled those in different ways. A lot of us worked towers where there was the cup of last resort. And you just needed somebody to tell you, this is what lifeguards do. If you get a break, you run into the water, try not to let anybody around you see you're going pee, or these are why the cups are there, that, it's awful, but if the Jeep's not going to come by and give you a break, you're going to use this cup. So lifeguarding is not glamorous that way.
Well, and I think, sorry to interrupt, but I think this is another bigger picture lifeguard thing that people just don't realize, that this, let's call it not an issue in quotes, but this conversation is, we're forced to sit in a tower for 8 hours with maybe no chance to get a break because watching the water is number one.
Yeah.
You can't take your eyes off. And guess what? We all have personal needs.
Yeah.
So the conversation of the bathroom back at headquarters still doesn't change the conversation of what happens when you got to go in the tower.
This is fun. This is fun stuff in some ways, because as writing about experience of women, I get to share things that were not always talked about by the men too. Like, where exactly do I go to the bathroom? What happens when you're on your period? There's guards who think that you're going to attract sharks. I mean, I'm really getting out there, but the mythology behind some of these things, we just have to demystify it. And when
Absolutely.
I demystify my story, there's some young, 18-year-old guy that's just so embarrassed to ask to go to the bathroom. Yep. So I do believe it's helpful that we open up topics that we faced, that people wondered about what we're facing, and that they're also trying to struggle with, in their own. How many of us, have tried to find a time when it's safe, called a dispatch, you got to go jump in the water, and then you're just trying to force it and hope that the public's not understanding what you're doing. And I know it's silly, but it's fun to talk about it. And these stories, 30, 40 years, 50 years later, are what guards remember sometimes.
Well, and guess what? It hasn't changed.
Oh, that's
right?
funny
Because
for me to hear this.
We're still having the same thing. We're still working in the tower, and you still need to figure out, okay, I got to pee right now. What am I going to do?
And these are instances when the worlds collide. We're more like each other than we're not, and we're just talking about it.
And I love that about lifeguarding, that it is intimate. I mean, the job requires you to be in a swimsuit majority of the time, ready to go at the beach, fairly, let's call it unprotected. You're in the open, you're in the elements, you're in the public's eye consistently. And so you have to figure out how to work those certain things within yourself in a modest way, or just figure it out as you go. And this is what that elicits in the human experience. Because working in an office building or something where you have these creature comforts that don't exist in lifeguarding forces the individual to relinquish certain comforts, right?
We're so vulnerable as lifeguards. And women came in, and it is that high tea environment. We're young, we're full of energy, we're doing this incredibly hard work. And then we're looking at each other with, our young, passionate eyes. Our bodies are exposed, and it's just kind of this collision of all this stuff taking place. And you said it, we're vulnerable. We're standing up out there, barely any clothes, looking to save lives, and it's coming together. And we came from swimming backgrounds too, though. We're used to that physicality, whether it's surfing, swimming, water polo. The physicality not only of the work, but the physicality of our bodies we bring. It's exciting. It was thrilling and scary.
Absolutely. Were there any standout moments for you in those early years working the towers and in that facet of the job? Comments from the public or things that you remember, things that were either positive or negative that would elicit certain topics to identify that time frame when it was early and new?
Yes and no. I certainly spoke with a lot of women that started the next generation with Baywatch, and they're constantly called Baywatch Babe. So they're looked at up in the tower after 1989, and the show, became worldwide. They were immediately, that generation of women were immediately Pamela Anderson. They were called a lot of things in reference to, TV. For me, I think I was in a fortunate place and time, at least at San Clemente. I felt pretty supported. I was in a state park with a campground. People were there for vacation. They trusted you, whether they should or not, as a young person. And then the dynamics between the other guards, that might have been more for me. I know this is not what I've heard from a lot of people regarding public comments, but there was a lot of peer pressure and love and gossip and drama between the people I was working with. So I don't have a short answer about that. I felt trusted by the public. I stood up a lot. I tried to make the people feel safe in my water.
And so there wasn't a time you thought that was questioned because of the male-female subject in those early days? Or were there other interviews maybe you had done where that became a subject?
There were interviews that over time, especially when I was at Huntington, that wanted to find out more about you as a woman lifeguard. A lot of the things came from other lifeguards, whether you're a man or woman. You're being watched to see if you can learn your job, how you're doing. And that's probably where I felt more pressure was, am I doing the job right? Who's watching me? The peer pressure that was involved in learning this job. Are they coaching me, supporting me? And there were certainly other young guards that wanted to judge you harder or thought they were in a position to tell you or criticize.
Yeah.
And
so what I'm hearing is a little more pressure from the skills of lifeguarding, more so the job itself.
That was probably my experience, and not every person I've interviewed had that experience. They're all across the board. But I felt supported by the public, surprisingly.
Yeah. And I think just because it's fresh on my mind, you brought up the idea of Baywatch, which did a lot of interesting things for our profession. But if we're sticking on the path we're on here, I think there's a lot of objectification that came from the lifeguard role being presented in that way. Although it did bring a lot of positive things, but I think that might be a different, and correct me if I'm wrong, but especially in this modern day and age, it is different. Like I have a younger sister and stuff, and the way things are projected for girls, whether it's Instagram or image or magazines or those kinds of things, based on your interviews or experience writing this book and stuff, did you find any things along that line where this kind of objectified viewpoint towards, I would even call it like a sexualization of the role of lifeguards in a way. And I do believe that's different for if you're a woman standing in the tower versus a guy, because there is that, like you said, that Pamela Anderson kind of look or take. touch on that for a little bit? What you're
Yeah, I'm making this all sound like it was great. The public trusted me, and that I'm really simplifying that. Um, I met a few women that had to deal with eating disorders over that idea of how they were being judged physically, and that more than statistically, I think there were more women involved with lifeguarding with that kind of pressure about just putting yourself out there. And so that was a real issue for some women. And then the idea of falling into stereotypes. All lifeguards, back when I was working, there was a whole movement to try to professionalize our image, men and women, for pay, believe it or not. There's this idea of equalizing ourselves with rangers to make sure that we were treated on the same level to get more pay, to be recognized as professionals. And there was lots of discussion going back then about not falling into our own stereotypes. And so that was the time I was involved in lifeguarding. And so that's so interesting. Being a woman, you might be stereotyped, yet lifeguarding was trying to grow up too, to be the professionals that they wanted to be perceived as. They had to present themselves more professionally.
Absolutely.
So all these things were moving forward. And then the stereotype, I don't know what it's like today, but there's, especially for Baywatch, there's still this whole definition of what, when you're standing up there, whether you're in a Jeep or operating a boat, that you're going to be tagged for that World Lifeguard. Your work and the Lifeguard Project's doing a really good job at defining the much greater, bigger picture of what a lifeguard does. It's much more than standing in a tower. But
and it's a hard concept to unsee.
Unsee that's perfect.
Presented in that way. It's easy to see, especially on the TV screen. Everyone's glistening and looking good, and you want that drama on the TV show. But I think and we've been fighting that fight for a while. But here, I think it's like a silo within that other concentric circle of, like you said, lifeguarding itself was trying to exit a stereotype.
Yeah.
Let alone now that discussion of women within that stereotype, within a stereotype, let's call it.
Well, totally. And we had to become the change, be the change you want to see in the world.
Absolutely.
And so we had to shift to, we're going back to that idea of young, we couldn't separate the work from who we were. We were also in our 20s.
Mm-hmm.
So we wanted to be those young people and get together at night and have that fun and have those parties. Many of us came together just for the summers. So we wanted to get the job done and be professional. And we also wanted to go home and listen to music and date each other at night.
Yeah.
So you had all these things you're bringing to your work and to your life. And it was quite thrilling.
Yeah. And how important is that too for our culture and bonding in that workplace where you are trusting people with your life?
Oh, yeah.
Right. The same person you're hanging out with at night, the next day might be backing you up on a rescue. I mean, that's crucially important to understand who that person is and engage with them outside of work and have that bond as well.
If we're thinking about it, again, I've got on my person looking back, where I did my first work at San Clemente, there was a line I think most of us were conscious about, that once you're on duty, that was your job. I worked other beaches that the line was blurred a little bit more. But I feel like where I got my basic skills, you were being evaluated, and your expectations were to understand what was at stake when you were at work. It wasn't the time to be blurring those lines.
And what do you think are the best qualities, like what you're describing there? What do you think are the qualities that make someone successful in that? When you said turn it on and you go into, I'm at work now and this is what I'm going to project, male or female, what do you think about that? What do you think that makes a successful lifeguard within that role? When you're like, this is my professional job now, this is what I'm going to portray.
So, wow, somebody's asking me. I know career lifeguards. I married a lifeguard who is a career lifeguard. I'm almost a short timer compared to people to be giving this advice. But and I worked for 11 years, some full-time, some part-time. So I get to look back and think about understanding your responsibility is huge. That we need to rely on one another might be even bigger now that I bring my own personal experience. Is that lifeguarding, you can feel like you're standing alone in a tower on your own. And the best lifeguards I met work as a team, and they share those responsibilities and they help each other learn and help you feel not alone. There's going to be a lot of downtime or time when you're alone as a lifeguard. But when you know that you're being supported and you've got backup, if you're lucky enough, and you've got people helping you strengthen your skills, or you're helping people, you're showing up on time. You've got a good work ethic, and you continue to grow your skills. And those transfer to a lot of different jobs.
Absolutely.
But with lifeguarding, when there really are lives at stake, these basic skills will serve you well as a lifeguard and for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned this by working at beach, Huntington State Beach, which has got the reputation as, the big surf, the big currents, a ton of rescues, all of which it has. But the years I worked there, the culture was a lot more, you're on your own. And I was able to contrast those experiences. The rescues got done. The work was done. I had an amazing experience there. But I realized that culture was kind of more you're on your own, do the job, be that waterman. And it was not always the job didn't always get done as well as it could have.
Sure. And I just bring up, I think it'll tie into where we're going. We have the story with, which you brought up before at Silver Strand, with two different contrasting personalities with two women in that early time. But before we tied into that, because I think this is building off of what you just said, the skills required when you show up and you're doing the job, and the conversation is, what are the skills of lifeguarding? You mentioned on these swim teams and competitive swim, it was you're judged by your speed, not your gender. That's what you brought up. And I think it's very similar in lifeguarding too. It's, can you do the job? Can you perform the skills? And that, in the early times, what I'm learning from you was something that was questioned in the beginning, or the idea of strength with the early women being able to provide, do the job itself. So touch on that as far as that subject, building off of, these are the qualities that make good lifeguards. How did that come about in those early times?
Yeah, I think from my own research and interviewing people that there were different obstacles to bringing in anyone different, and I'm looking at women. And the one real issue, when you give up locker rooms and bathrooms, it was strength. Can a woman really do this job? Can she really swim through the surf, back me up, carry the guy out of the surf? A lot of it boiled down to strength. And there's ways to measure that, but there was a lot of subjectivity. And that had to been proven in different ways, whether it was fair or not. And I think those issues got resolved on more of a gut level than any way you could measure that. That was the thing that there were size and weight limitations in the early days, different agencies.
I think a lot of people don't know there used to be a height and a weight restriction just for you to apply to be a
5'5", 150 was a standard. I don't think it was ever really used other than just kind of this idea out there. And I knew men that I was standing taller than them and weighed more. So
yeah.
It was an idea, and that was out there. There were a few advertisements that said male only. So there was this idea of strength. And then there's examples in stories, one I just read to you, of women who passed lifeguard training and then were still on the end after evaluations and after getting a passing score, we're still passed up. No, in the end, it's that gut feeling. I still don't really trust that. And those were some barriers. They didn't last too long. Very short period in time, there was this unspoken thing that kept women being invited to guard. But once women were in training, there were blips along the way, but it pretty quickly gave way to let's see how you do in the field. And when women were supported and given opportunities to train just like everyone else, they faded away. It didn't mean that all women had it great. There were still ideas and different rules and different values at different agencies.
And what specific things do you think pushed that? Because like you said, there was, even though from what I'm hearing in those early times, we've grown since from the objective height and weight restriction and all these objective things. And okay, well now you passed the swim test, you passed the training, you made all these things, but we're still not sure, right? That was the early stage of our growth in understanding this. What do you think was the opposite of that proved the point to these early kind of
leaders,
standards or early leaders, or when it was a newer concept to start, women were showing up to lifeguarding? What do you think were the things that were proving that and them going, oh, you know what, we're convinced now? Was it that they could make a gnarly rescue? Was it that, like, where did that?
Well, what a good question, because, there was no one point, because all agencies are led differently.
And every beach is different.
And a lot of people don't understand there were no picket lines either for women to get involved in lifeguarding. It had been a man's world. It's all people knew at first. Women didn't know that they could lifeguard. They'd only seen the men doing the job. And then the men thought they could only be the lifeguards. They didn't see women doing these swim teams or college teams. They'd only seen women birthing their kids, cooking their meals, secretaries at work. So there's a much greater movement of equality going on. And once women got to training for whatever reason, there was an opportunity to fail anybody for really any reason, no matter how many scores they wrote. There was always that last day. I bet it still remains the same, where your gut can say, I just don't think so. You don't have, and that's subjective. So there, this group of women like myself that started showing up, and you went through lifeguard training and you passed. And to be specific about what shifted, it's what maybe didn't shift. Did a woman miss the rescue? Did she have to be rescued? Did they not pass first aid? Were they unable to do all the aspects of what a lifeguard could do? And that never really happened. There were a few people got fired. I know of one woman that got fired, and it didn't have to do with her lifeguard skills. It had to be being a poor employee, just like a few men would not pass probation or be fired.
There's plenty of people that make the stereotype true for us,
right,
in a negative way too. And that's not a gender topic. That's you're just making us look bad topic.
Yeah. So I think the pivotal moment was getting us on the beach, giving us that opportunity to try to do the job. And, my friend, one of my mentors, John Mulvaney, even wrote, he's his hands on his hips. We'll see if you can cut it. He's one of the biggest and best supporters of any new guard. And he wrote me, I didn't even remember the incident. He said, one of my first days, he saw me make a rescue and all of his fears just melted. I don't remember that day, but he remembers it, So for whatever reason, whether or not I deserved his nod, I had a supporter, he quit living in a world of fear about my skills.
Wow.
And helped me move forward. And that's what I needed, was somebody to keep showing me how to do the job.
Absolutely. And let's not bring these conversations in. I just want to know the skills. So why do I have to?
I want to know the skills. And I'm an insecure 18-year-old woman trying to learn this, deeply important job. I'm scared too.
Well, and I love what you said. It's not what we did to shift. It was what we did that didn't shift anything. Look, the job is getting done. The beach is handled. The rescues are being made. All of these things that you thought were gonna, let's say in my interpretation, fall apart if you're letting a woman into the tower. Well, it's not.
Yeah, and,
Look at this,
and I'm
right?
making it sound simple again.
Of course.
There were biases. There were women that were treated very unfairly. There's people, the men, and they were all men for us first generation, that were our bosses, our supervisors, and our peers that brought their own baggage about women. So this big mix of people trying to fit in together and a bunch of unknowns. And how do we sort that out? And I'd love to hear from modern women. How are they still sorting it out? And how are we bringing in people that are different from men and women? It's all always changing.
Absolutely. And maybe that's a good time to go into the story you told me at Silver Strand, because I think that was one of the things where someone was Janet Wardell, right? You mentioned there were certain things that people were doing to make it more difficult for her. So do you want to go into that story?
Sure.
Maybe that's a good time.
Yeah, we talked briefly, about two of the women I am writing about, because again, people face so many different situations going in as firsts. And one of the women I met, her name was Janet Wardell, and she was a great swimmer. She wanted to go work Silver Strand so she could bike to work. She's loved the ocean, a great body surfer. And she passed training and was assigned to Silver Strand. That's on the southernmost border for anybody listening, where ultimately Borderfield meets Mexico, the southernmost southwestmost part of California meets Mexico with this corrugated wall. It's incredible. And they did Coronado area all up to Imperial Beach. So she gets hired, and she brings with her own personality, an extremely strong swimmer, tall woman, 5'11", and she's extremely shy. She shares this with me, that she's very shy, and she's not got really, she's insecure about her looks. The whole package she brings is, loves the ocean, but she's still growing up. She's bringing her own insecurities way beyond the ocean. So she shows up and is told to report to headquarters, and every headquarters is physically different. And in this particular headquarters, you walk through the shower room to get to the headquarters above. So the guys at Silver Strand were pretty well known for being a tight crew, and even cliquey, I think, is a fair way to present who these guys were. And, I think they cared for each other deeply, and they had their own way of doing their work. So they think it's really funny on the first day, as Janet goes to headquarters, to all be naked in the shower room. They think this is fun. So I've told you a little bit how you put yourself in Janet's shoes, and she's walking through there and just kind of shell-shocked, and that's her welcome to Silver Strand. So beyond that, that's one incident. Okay, kind of being dorky. But it was the beginning of a pattern for those guys to leave her alone, not support her. I've got to speak with those guys about what that meant for her in those days. And, most of them had the insights to wish they could have understood a little bit more about it. But she was left alone in towers. She wasn't really, nobody was climbing up with her to talk to her, to show her things. There were no ladders on the towers. Seemed to be a big story there. She had to climb up the back of the tower and press up. And then to make the rescue, you jump off the tower. That just was so foreign to me. It's dangerous. Where were the ladders? It wasn't strength. I think it was a story of humiliation. I'm sounding judgmental. It meant something to her, though. She didn't understand why it took her longer to climb up the tower. She was worried she wasn't watching her water. I thought that was so sincere that she wasn't even taking that personally. She wanted to be the best lifeguard possible. So when she made that special little press up, she couldn't see her water. And it went on like that for years. She still chose to lifeguard for over 6 years. mostly alone, not shown a lot of support. And she needed money. She loved the water. And then about 5 years in, there was a second woman started, Carlin Pipes, and she'd swum with her. Janet was like her older sister when they'd done club swimming together. Carlin had, she's written about this in a book, by the way, called The Do-Over. And Carlin had a boyfriend who got her into lifeguarding, and he was a Strand boyfriend. And Carlin shows up and they fall in love with her. She is the greatest. And Carlin drinks, and she drinks a lot. And she likes to party, and she takes off her top at parties and dances on a table. And she is much loved. She's the greatest guard that the Strand guys have ever met. And I tell this story. They're both extremely honest about their experience, but it was a tale of two lifeguards. They came in with very different personalities, and who got supported and who didn't was a very sad story to me in many ways. Janet looks back in positive ways about some things. She would have loved to have become a permanent. She loved the ocean that much, and nobody showed her how to take the tests, how to get on those lists. That's another way of showing support for someone. How do you become a seasonal supervisor? How do you become a permanent? What's the bureaucracy? So that wasn't afforded to her. And Carlin gets fired. She becomes a poor employee. She's not cutting it with the basic skill level of what it takes to be a lifeguard, showing up on time, showing up sober. And she does get sober, and she's a successful businesswoman. She's thought it through. She's apologized to her own boss. And that's her past now. She's gone on to be this wonderful, self-realized, interesting, successful businesswoman. So a lot more happened in that story. This is a summary of a different experience, a different culture, and something kind of sad.
Sure, but I think within those two examples, right, the same beach, two earlier women in lifeguarding, that male overarching perspective to it, we could almost do a whole podcast on breaking that down. But I think that all of the things you just mentioned are so valuable for people that are in lifeguarding and that understand those dynamics. And male or female aside, just what type of employee you have that shows up, that's responsible, that's being guided versus someone who's not, versus someone who's maybe bringing in, like you said, that party aspect that promotes the negative stereotype of what lifeguards can be known as sometimes. There's a lot to break down there. I think it's I'm not a psychologist. No, but
then picture too, this is happening at the southernmost isolated part of California. They're working by their own rules. They're just off there doing their thing, irregardless of what's happening at Huntington and the professionalism that's come into lifeguarding maybe. So yes.
I think we can learn a lot.
I think so too. I learned a lot, and I was sad listening to Janet. I got to go permanent. I had people show me the way. And here was a woman that had all the skills, and she could have developed more over her own self-image if people had befriended her. And that part of it made me very sad that she was left alone.
Absolutely. And I think bringing back the subject of male versus female versus just lifeguarding, the subject of lifeguarding, it's so important to have a good mentor within that role, because I remember the first times I showed up to the tower, and I think this is something that's universal in the job, is having that positive mentorship and understanding, because you don't just get the skills because you showed up to lifeguard training for a few days. You get the skills because you came in with the prerequisite of swimming and physical ability, and then you pass down this wisdom from the top down by spending time with your mentors to understand the nuances of what it takes to be a really good lifeguard, which is understanding many, many dynamic situations of that environment.
Yeah.
And so, we've learned so much and we've grown so much, but I think a lot of people would resonate with that. And especially for the younger girls who, you can get hired at 16 years old.
Yeah.
And be put with this immense responsibility. Now, if you're having to deal with that added pressure
Yeah.
on top of basic, I mean, we all have insecurities. Everyone's human.
Yeah.
Add that pressure onto performing the tasks of a lifeguard. It just distracts you from what the point is, which is bringing people in alive from the ocean and having people have a good day at the beach.
Yeah.
So, wow. I love that.
Yeah. No, and I've told you, I think mentors are so important. And then I was fortunate enough, even in the old days, to be in a position toward the end of my work to realize that now I can be a mentor to both men and women. But I had a special place in my heart for the young women that I got to work with toward the end of my job, to put myself in their shoes, to realize how great it felt when somebody climbed in your tower with you. And you both stood together looking at the water. It was just everything at that time. You weren't alone. And
you were just for people listening, you ended up becoming a peace officer.
I became.
Just fill us in on that.
It was a really important part. I seasonaled for 4 years. I was still quite young, 21, but San Clemente had showed me path forward to be a seasonal soup. And then lifeguarding was changing. They were hiring a lot more permanents at the time. And I was fortunate enough to be on the list and get hired at a very young age, which, I was just turning 22, which is shocking. Maybe I can say frankly, maybe they were excited to bring on this first woman. And I wasn't going to question it. I was going to take the opportunity and learn and not question, at least my ability to keep moving forward. So I did get to be a permanent. I went to Huntington, and I had wonderful mentors there too. There were some things going on I didn't want to be involved with. The lifeguarding was thrilling. And then I had a group of people, again, I was so fortunate with to help train me and help me understand the job. And it did involve being a peace officer. That was something I had to personally come to grips with because I wanted to be a permanent lifeguard. I didn't really want to do the peace officer part. So when you do buy onto a job, it's good to be self-realized about what that means. I didn't go through peace officer training until my 3rd year there. So I got 2 years of the lifeguard experience, which was very exciting. And then my 3rd year, I kind of patrolled parking lots and stopped drunk drivers.
And did law enforcement as a lifeguard, which is a whole nother thing.
And that's a whole nother podcast about why we're lifeguards doing that. It remains a question today. And I'll let you explain that someday about how different agencies work. And working for state parks, that's one of the requirements when you go full time.
On the mentorship theme, when you did fulfill that role and you are now a supervising a peace officer, you're in a role for the seasonals. Were there any female lifeguards working at the time that you were able to interact as a mentor to, or any options in that? Or did you find yourself?
I think as soon as I was put in positions, authority is kind of a strong word, but when you become a seasonal supervisor.
It's not leadership.
Yeah, and you become a seasonal supervisor, you become a permanent. You want to put forth that you are in that leadership position, whether someone accepts it or not, but you might be doing their schedule. You hope to be setting an example rather than bossing them around. Those are things, again, I was so fortunate to have good role models that taught me those lessons. And there were people that might not want to hear those and learn those. But my job continued to be to set that example. And I had mistakes and blowups, of course, like everyone else, but I kind of knew the direction I wanted to go in. When I started at Huntington, I stood in towers. I didn't have to. That would have been something you would have learned in different beaches, to learn the water. And so more than trying to set that example, I wanted to learn the water. Now I realize, not everybody does that. You wanted to keep hitting your basics. And I think that's the perspective I was coming from.
Yeah. And then maybe it's a good time to talk about your daughter became a lifeguard as well.
Yeah.
Right. So in that context, and maybe it's looking back, or maybe it was at the time. How did that dynamic, like, what was that experience like through your perspective when she decided to take that role on?
So that's so interesting to me. I got out of lifeguarding in 90, but I married a lifeguard. I went on and lived 30 years of other stuff.
And not just any lifeguard. I think for the viewers, it's important to know you were with who was our chief lifeguard, Alex Peabody.
Work his way up too.
And he pushed a lot of boundaries within the state park system as far as gaining access for lifeguards throughout the state, up in the North Coast and all that stuff, which is also a whole nother podcast.
It is.
But I think it's important as a dynamic that you were drawn to this person, and then that was your husband, was through the lifeguard world, and now your daughter's becoming a lifeguard. I think that's a good, just wanted to fill that in
as a lifeguard family on many different levels, it kept me involved, even though I went on in different jobs. We were the stereotypical lifeguard family. My kids were junior guards, and Alex would go to work, and the Jeep would come home here. So it's my son's in college or just finishing high school. You're talking about my daughter, but I want to touch on Ryan because he's a great swimmer, junior guards, and I was more fearful when he started lifeguarding. I hadn't had a kid become a lifeguard, and all of a sudden, in my older brain, what happens if someone dies in his water? His life will be messed up. And even though I knew he was super competent and strong, I had to deal with those fears. I was like, oh no, can he just skip guarding? So that was and he went on, became a great lifeguard and seasonal lifeguard for 6 years in different locations. So then Claire goes away to college and does other things. She's a runner, and lifeguarding's kind of off her radar. She'd been a junior guard. She graduates from college and for a variety of reasons decides, I'm going to give it a try. And I'm like, oh no, I thought I was home free. And she gets recruited by a good family lifeguard friend and has a really unique, interesting experience working in San Diego, but the biggest part of it was Mendocino, the big far north. So I was so proud of her. She went to New Zealand, did the whole lifeguard seasonal experience in a really unique way. I kind of let go of my big fears after, I'd been through that with Ryan. You don't have much control over it. And she worked really unique places. She's more of a surfer than a swimmer, so she brought her own skill set. And rather than just mom looking at her daughter becoming a guard, I think it was a family impression of me. I'm more curious about some of my friends, like John Mulvena and some of these men I worked with from the early days that, were kind of questioning us, and their daughters became lifeguards. And I love those stories. And they became the biggest proponents for women in lifeguarding. They just, they seemed so happy and so supportive to see their own daughters. And I have a special place for those stories. They're just amazing.
Yeah, that's awesome. And does that find its way into the book as well?
They're especially, I keep saying John, I had so many helpful people. When his daughters, yes. And his daughter became a lifeguard, married a lifeguard who became a ranger. And her story is incredible because she went on, had her kids, became a nurse, and she recently went back and went through seasonal lifeguard training at 44. And she wanted to be on the beach while her sons were going through junior lifeguards. And to graduate lifeguard training at 44, it's,
And I'm pretty sure I met her at training and was very passionate about that whole profession, everything. Very unique perspective too.
Yeah, and she got a special award for being the most influential team player. She came with that experience and that perspective of how important it is to work together.
Yeah, absolutely. If you were standing in a tower right now as your daughter's supervisor, let's say it's day one or something, is there some kind of advice, and whether it's the gender topic we've been touching or just general lifeguard advice, Is there something if this was, let's say you went back in time and you guys were just for the first time, she's standing up as a new lifeguard, is there some advice you would offer to her or something you would want to make sure that she understood, or for all the lifeguards out there that they would understand?
For any young lifeguard, I think, she's 28, so I never even watched her stand a tower. But the advice, it's such a privilege to be in a position to be asked about advice. I've already talked a lot about mentors, how important that is. And I want us to have the eyes where we're looking out for one another, like who's being left out in your department, who's that shy person, who's that person that you could make friends with, help them, support them in the job, and make them feel not alone. I keep going back to that feeling of loneliness, but there are a lot of times when you are alone in lifeguarding and you get in your own brain, and look for that person that might need that extra help and that extra encouragement, and reach out to them and help them. And we all bring so many different things to lifeguarding, and we should remember to bring kindness, bring that helper attitude. And that might be what I look back on now is, could I have helped more people? Could I have been less into my own head about trying to prove myself? And who was I leaving out? And that might be where I'm landing these days.
Oh, I love that. And you bring up oftentimes your perspective now looking back. In this period of writing this book and through that process, even from when we spoke about it very early on, before even I was going public with the project and stuff, we've been in contact for a while now, and seeing you work on that, much like myself with all these things, the podcast and everything. Are there certain things that changed, or things that you saw that changed within your time of doing these interviews, research, interviewing the women, on the subject of women and lifeguarding? Talk to me about that. And did you see, instead of looking back now on your career, but looking back on the beginning of your project, let's call it, or the book, to now, certain things that you learned within yourself or you realized that you think would be valuable to share?
The whole process has been incredible. And looking back now on what I didn't know, and meeting women that were like me that I didn't know, boy, I wish I'd known these people during that time. And we were really pretty isolated to our own groups, and I've got to go out and meet these people. So what I've learned, we could have all supported each other more. I keep going back to support. There's the young woman you met who's actually doing support groups, right? Or not, that's wrong.
Talking about the Water Women's Weekend.
Yeah, they're getting together to talk about these things. That's pretty interesting. And I didn't understand how the responsibility we'd taken on, how big it really was. When I had kids, I told you I was afraid all of a sudden. So when I'm doing the job, you're trying to do your best. You're trying not to blow it in front of your peers. Mm-hmm. We all will have some rescue during our time lifeguarding, maybe more than one, maybe quite a few, depending on where we're working and what we're exposed to. That really triggers, somebody would have died if you weren't there. So something shifts in you, or maybe you'd never seen a dead body during your whole career or your life. And all of these things you learned in training, you didn't understand till you see somebody pulled from the water. So to know all that when you're up there, it might have been too overwhelming at first. To bring all this experience now, so when somebody tells me a story of a really hard rescue or seeing something that they can't let go of, it hammers home how serious this job is, and that we're charging these young people with some pretty heavy duty stuff. And I don't know if I could have been 18 doing the job if I understood it all. I hope I could have. And as you grow up, you start to understand what you're doing more and more. The career lifeguards, the guys who've written books, Mike Broussard, Evan Droska, they've articulated that pretty well. They did their careers as lifeguards. They've seen a lot. Yet they're training, they're walking this fine line of supporting young people and not trying to scare them off from the job also, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You give yourself time.
Well, it makes perfect sense. I mean, having the hindsight is 100%, right?
Yeah.
That whole thing. And
Yeah.
coming into it, for me, I started at 16 and coming into it, not really knowing, you're kind of just trying to follow the things you just learned in training and go,
Yeah.
oh, this is fun. This is cool. I get to be at the beach. But then you start seeing those experiences or you start looking back. And I think it's important and why a lot of the driving factor of having these things to be able to sit and explain them to people before they come to certain realizations on their own, that maybe we can take a shortcut for them understanding or understanding why we're asking for more funding or why we're asking for the manual to be changed to include women's uniforms, right? Like, which back now it seems simple, right? It seems, oh, we didn't have that. People coming into it today, we've had so much growth from that. But I love what you were saying, that in hindsight, you didn't think about that responsibility that came in as the early women who represented that subject matter, because you were just going, hey, I'm just here. I want to make sure I do the job and all this stuff that this immense responsibility I'm involved with. But now, and what I'm kind of learning is simultaneously while having this conversation is there was this other thing attached to it where as the early women, you were also representing that, which was the conversation more so back in the day. Do the job? Are they strong enough? All stuff, which now seems, simple to know because we've worked in that capacity. I have days at the beach when I'm the only guy on the beach.
Yeah.
And it's not about that. It's not. It's about knowing that everyone's got my back. The job is getting done. But I love what you said about that. There's like this twofold responsibility in a way, but unsuspecting.
Yeah, there's so much we didn't know when you flash back. This jumble of things going on. Do I have another? Do I have time to tell you another?
As much time as you want.
There, that idea of looking back. There's something way before the book happened to me when I was up here, and Claire was a child, and I'm on the beach below my house, which is platform. I haven't guarded for a long time, and not really thinking about it too much. I'm working. I'm raising my kids. I'm living this whole other life. And I always got in the habit of bringing my fins down to the beach, even if I'm a mom. I'm a weaker mom, but I have my fins down there with another mom and her daughter. And there's this notorious rip in the springtime that runs below the house at Rio Del Mar platform, the Tower 7 rip. I don't even know what the tower is anymore. So we're sitting watching the kids, and the rip starts pulling, and then all of a sudden there's a head bobbing out in it. And, once you've been a lifeguard, you don't look at the water the same. Mm-hmm. And this is a rescue. This is a big rescue. And I'm kind of shocked. What am I going to do? So, I rip off my top. I'm wearing my sports bra. I grab my fins. I realize I don't have a chance or a choice. And there's no cell phones yet. So I tell my friend next to me, Mary, watch Claire. And I go swimming out in this rip. And I haven't, guarded for quite a while. And the big takeaway, besides a hairy rescue, was I'm not as strong as I was. And you always feel as a lifeguard, that you have an overdrive, and I don't have it. And I'm screaming at the kid, hang on, I'm almost there. This never happened to me my whole career. And I'm just, doing the best I can. I've got fins, so you can go pretty fast. And I get out there, and I've just never had that feeling before. Like, wow, I might not have been strong enough. And I think that's why I'm telling you this, is I didn't know how strong I was until I wasn't. And I grabbed the kid, no tube, and I'm like, just hang on, I got you. I just need to take a little rest. I never said these things, and then I show him my fins. I go, see, I have fins on. I'm just blubbering. I'm a fool. Everything's going to be okay. And there are some surfers down the beach, and I'm whistling at them to come help me. They're oblivious. So after I've just, got a little rest, I swim over to the break with him. And he wants to face me. Everything about this goes wrong.
How old was the kid about?
He was about 12, but he's pretty chubby. And of course, he doesn't want to go on his back. He wants to, all the things that you've been taught as a lifeguard, nothing. It's all falling apart, And I get him in the surf. It's okay bringing him in finally with fins in the white water. And I get him in. And I don't think to somehow get back up. I don't, everything's kind of a blur. I just knew I got him in. I was just sitting down trying to catch my breath. And I that's the last rescue I've ever made. And the takeaway for me, besides I think the kid would have died, was I didn't realize how strong I was back then. And it's a story of anybody who becomes a lifeguard. And I realized that. And I'm glad I could help the kid. And it was a perspective about what I was doing back in those years.
Oh, it's an incredible story. I love that. And it just touches on so many pieces of what I'm trying to explain or help through other people be this vessel through the project to explain, which is here you are watching your own kid as a mom on the beach. You decided, let's talk about the details, just breaking this down, to bring your fins down. Why? That's what lifeguards do.
Yeah.
Right? You can't undo that. You can't see the beach in the same light once you've been trained to see it in the eyes of a lifeguard. You tell your friend to watch your own kid so you can be selfless in rescuing this other person because you identify a rescue. And yeah, the subject of strength is not a subject of male, female, whatever. The subject of strength in the lifeguards world is no one will ever be stronger than the ocean. No one will ever be stronger than it. Doesn't matter. If you're not looking the right way, a knee-high wave is going to sweep you off your feet. Yeah. Just look at shore break and all the people, in the north that get just swept off by shore break and die immediately.
Yeah.
I mean, these are the traits and characteristics of lifeguarding, which I think it's very difficult for people to understand. And it's our duty as ambassadors of the ocean to spread that and to break that down. I mean, you're also in Santa Cruz, right? Which the water is freezing. You're jumping in with your sports bra to go in and help this kid. And of course you're going to be winded and tired. I mean, I've had situations like that even when I'm in shape and young.
Oh, that's good to hear.
It's
humbling.
None of us will be as strong as the ocean, but it's that exactly what you described. Here you are off duty, and awareness which you can't turn off. Letting your kid stay at the beach while you go help someone else and putting yourself in that situation. And what a cool, just to tie this whole conversation back, I mean, what a cool moment for you. And just hearing that that's your last rescue is really impactful too. I think it's very powerful with that realization. I mean, it really ties in everything that you're doing on this subject and elicits the truth that, yeah, it's a young person's game. I mean, our body is the tool. And we are sacrificing our health for the benefit of others. And people don't understand that when they look at us standing in the tower with red trunks, or if they're having that Pamela Anderson viewpoint to a cute chick that's in the tower, right? And that is not who this person is. That's not who what they represent. The aspect of lifeguarding and what they've chosen to do in this profession.
It's going to change your life.
Exactly.
Yeah. And
that's what we're here for people to think about. And you have to, the gender subject, all that stuff. Can you do this?
It's all part of our story, but again, we're more like and then different.
And it's all so helpful for our growth and understanding that. And hopefully eventually the public and us as stewards and standing at the public, hey, like if someone says those comments to you or those things or approaches, I always approach it and rebuttal with something for them to learn about lifeguarding. Yeah.
Oh, with a positive,
Because I know where the stereotypes lie. We can't change them overnight. We can listen and sit with them and do the podcast and it's whatever else. But I always, if I'm working and I'm on the beach or in the tower, in the unit, whatever it is, or even at a dinner conversation, oh, you're a lifeguard, must be the best job in the world. Wow, you ever rescue anybody? The standard questions that come out, I always rebuttal with, well, did you know X, or did you know this?
Oh, I love that. I got to start doing that more.
And it's slowly just chipping away at the iceberg that we have to break down of what we are responsible as stewards of that profession to continue to grow. And look at all the things we discussed today, that the growth that's happened from those early days to where we are right now. A lot of positive things have changed. Yeah. And so I think it's our time to start.
And though we talked about with all the change, I'm blown away by the training and the equipment. What did we say? It still comes down to a single lifeguard swimming out, no matter how much has changed. The core remains the same.
Yeah, rescue fins and your buoy or your tube, whatever, right? And like I said, the body is the tool. And a lot of people don't realize that. And it is the basics always. And I do also love the simplicity of that too, which is, it's visceral. It's a visceral experience to be able to do that job in that way, and what it elicits out of you as a human, right? The basic human stuff that, like all those things we discussed, fear, insecurity, strength, uncertainty.
Yep.
And that progression. And not to mention, like you keep saying, looking back now, man, I was 18, 20 years old doing that.
Yeah, exactly.
It's profound.
Yeah, and then you have these career guards who are, applying that kind of intensity to 30 years and teaching and still able to be rescue ready. So there's another layer of choices that people have made.
Absolutely. Well, Deb, I think I'm out of questions.
We talked about everything.
Just about everything. And we also realized that we have like 5 more podcasts to talk about too. But is there anything else just in closing that maybe I missed, or that you'd like to bring up before we kind of close this out?
You mentioned that once you've been a lifeguard, it's difficult to undo it. You look at the water. I still tell people on the beach below, the tide's coming up. It's a big swell. Here's the water line. You might want to move your kid. But because I didn't just lifeguard, I want to mention my perspective. I've taken beyond that into different jobs. And there's also, for all the intensity, there's a calmness that I was left with. And when everybody was losing their head about them, when I worked in an office that a budget document might not be ready on time, I didn't have to say it to them, but I was able to take that breath and remind myself, nobody's bleeding out, everybody's breathing, and give myself that moment of zen and perspective that lifeguarding taught me, that it's all going to be okay.
Absolutely. And this is why lifeguards are successful in everything that they end up going in to do, usually.
Be right.
Absolutely.
And thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. This was a blast.
Thanks for letting me bug you. But yeah, I think with that's a good spot to wrap this conversation up, at least the first, hopefully, of many. And then for people that are listening, keep your eyes out for, I don't know, we probably can't share what the title of the book is, but
I'm still not set on that, but there will be a book.
There will be, and you will find out on the Lifeguard
on this
Project
podcast.
Yes,
Jessica.
And you'll find out exactly as soon as it comes out. And I'm looking forward. We got to listen to that little excerpt today of the first chapter, and I'm beyond stoked. So,
that's great.
Yeah, that's going to be exciting. I'm looking forward to it, and I think it'll be really cool. So
thank you so much.
Thank you, Deb.